The little girl stood barefoot in the cold hallway on Christmas morning, holding a paper snowflake in one hand and a broken crayon in the other, when she asked her father the question that would change all three of their lives. "Daddy, what do you wish for Christmas?" Her father, Rowan Mercer, stopped folding the last clean shirt into an old cardboard box and looked at his daughter as if she had asked him something impossible to answer. For a moment, the small apartment was completely silent except for the faint hum of the heater struggling against the winter cold. Rowan forced a smile, crouched beside his 8-year-old daughter, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He wanted to tell her he wished for a new bicycle for her, a warm home, a refrigerator full of food, and enough money that she would never again have to pretend she wasn't hungry. But instead, with tears hidden behind a tired smile, he whispered that his Christmas wish was simply to have one more morning where his little girl could wake up believing everything was going to be okay. And standing just outside the open doorway, his new neighbor, Seraphina Vale, heard every word. If you believe kindness can give people a second chance when life has taken almost everything from them, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of someone's greatest miracle. Rowan had learned not to expect miracles. At 36, he was already carrying the exhaustion of someone twice his age. 3 years earlier, his wife, Maribel, had died unexpectedly after a long illness, leaving him alone with their daughter, Juniper, and a mountain of bills that never seemed to disappear. Rowan had once worked as a restaurant manager, but after Maribel became sick, he reduced his hours so he could care for her. Eventually, the restaurant replaced him. Since then, he had worked wherever someone was willing to hire him. Construction in the mornings, warehouse shifts in the evenings, deliveries on weekends, and occasional repair jobs whenever someone needed a pair of capable hands. He never complained. He simply came home tired, cooked whatever was cheapest, helped Juniper with her homework, and listened when she talked about her dreams. Their apartment was small and worn, with peeling paint near the windows and a heater that sometimes stopped working at night. Yet Rowan kept the place clean because Juniper called it home, and he refused to let poverty make her feel ashamed. That December had been especially difficult. A winter storm had destroyed several roads, cutting back the construction work Rowan depended on. His electricity bill was overdue, the landlord had given him a warning, and there was barely enough food in the kitchen for another week. Juniper knew they were struggling, but Rowan had become an expert at hiding the truth behind cheerful routines. He told her the empty refrigerator meant they were eating healthier. He called second-hand clothes vintage. When she asked why Santa might bring fewer presents this year, he told her Santa knew some children needed bigger miracles than others. What Rowan never told her was that he had quietly sold his old wedding watch to buy her a small Christmas gift. It was nothing expensive, just a wooden music box shaped like a little house, but he had remembered how she once stopped outside a store window and stared at one for nearly 10 minutes. Across the street lived Seraphina Vale, a woman who seemed to belong to an entirely different world. She was 32, successful, confident, and always dressed with an effortless elegance that made people assume she had never experienced hardship. She had recently moved into the neighborhood after accepting a position with a large architectural firm. Her home was beautiful, but it felt strangely empty. During the daytime she worked long hours, attended meetings, and returned to a quiet house where no one waited for her. Christmas had never been her favorite holiday because it reminded her of her younger brother, Elias, who had died when they were children. Her parents had spent years arguing after his death, and eventually their family fractured. Seraphina learned early that expensive things could fill a room but could not fill a heart. She had noticed Rowan before she ever spoke to him. Every morning, she saw him walking Juniper to school while carrying a lunch bag in one hand and fixing the girl's scarf with the other. Sometimes Rowan left for work wearing a jacket that was clearly too thin for the weather. Sometimes he came home long after sunset with his shoulders bent from exhaustion. Yet whenever Juniper ran toward him, his face changed completely. The tiredness disappeared, replaced by the kind of smile that made Seraphina wonder what kind of man could still smile after life had been so cruel to him. Their first real conversation happened on a bright December afternoon when Juniper's homemade paper decorations blew across the sidewalk. Seraphina helped gather them, and Juniper thanked her with the seriousness of a tiny adult. She invited Seraphina inside to see their Christmas tree, which was actually a small artificial tree missing several branches. Seraphina expected Rowan to look embarrassed. Instead, he proudly explained that Juniper had decorated it herself. There were handmade ornaments, ribbons cut from old wrapping paper, and tiny paper stars. Seraphina smiled and told Juniper it was the most beautiful tree she had seen that year. Rowan quietly thanked her, and something about his expression stayed with her long after she returned home. Over the next several days, Seraphina began noticing little things. Rowan gave his portion of dinner to Juniper when he thought she wasn't looking. He repaired her broken school bag with thread. He stayed awake late at night searching for extra work. One afternoon, Seraphina saw him sitting on the apartment steps, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. He looked defeated for the first time. She almost approached him, but she stopped because she knew some people needed help without wanting to feel pitied. Instead, she started thinking about what she could do without humiliating him. Then came Christmas morning. Seraphina had gone outside to retrieve a package when she heard Juniper's question through the open door. She froze when Rowan answered. His wish wasn't for money. It wasn't for a better job or a new car or anything for himself. He simply wanted one peaceful morning for his daughter. Seraphina stood there with tears gathering in her eyes because she suddenly understood something she had forgotten years ago. People could survive without luxury, but they could not survive forever without hope. That afternoon, Seraphina knocked on Rowan's door carrying a small basket. She told him she had bought too much food for Christmas and wondered if he and Juniper would help her finish it. Rowan hesitated, pride immediately rising inside him. He thanked her but said they were fine. Seraphina didn't argue. She simply smiled and said she had never been good at cooking for one person and would probably burn half of it anyway. Juniper appeared behind her father, saw the basket, and immediately recognized the smell of cinnamon. Rowan looked at his daughter, then at Seraphina, and finally stepped aside. The three of them spent that afternoon preparing Christmas dinner together. Juniper made a terrible attempt at decorating cookies, Seraphina laughed until tears filled her eyes, and Rowan slowly relaxed for the first time in months. They talked about ordinary things. Favorite movies, childhood memories, embarrassing school stories, and Christmas traditions. For a few hours, Rowan forgot about the overdue bills. But the next morning, reality returned. Rowan received a call from his landlord informing him that unless he paid the overdue rent within 48 hours, he would have to leave. Rowan sat on the edge of his bed staring at the phone. Juniper was still asleep. He looked around the tiny apartment, at the little wooden music box hidden inside a drawer, and felt something inside him break. He had spent years fighting to keep a roof over his daughter's head, and now he feared he might finally lose. Seraphina found him later that day sitting outside with his head lowered. This time she sat beside him without asking questions. Rowan eventually told her everything. He admitted he was terrified, not for himself but for Juniper. He could sleep in a car if necessary, but he couldn't bear watching his daughter wonder why she no longer had a home. Seraphina listened quietly, then told him something he had not expected to hear. She knew a company looking for a facilities supervisor. The position paid well, offered steady hours, and required someone with exactly the kind of repair and management experience Rowan had. She could recommend him, but she could not guarantee the job. Rowan almost refused. He didn't want a favor. Seraphina reminded him that accepting an opportunity wasn't the same as accepting pity. She told him that sometimes people crossed paths because one person had something the other needed. Rowan finally agreed to apply. 2 days later, Rowan walked into the interview wearing his best suit, an old one that was slightly too tight around the shoulders. He expected to be rejected. Instead, the interviewer spent nearly an hour asking about his work history and problem-solving skills. Rowan spoke honestly about every job he had taken, every difficult situation he had handled, and every time he had chosen responsibility over comfort. By the end of the interview, the company offered him the position. Rowan stood outside the building afterward, holding the employment papers with shaking hands. He didn't celebrate immediately. He simply looked toward the winter sky and whispered a thank you to the woman who had reminded him that his life wasn't over. When he returned home, Juniper ran toward him. Rowan lifted her into his arms and cried openly for the first time in years. He told her they were staying in their home. He told her he had a new job. Then he pulled the little wooden music box from the drawer and gave it to her. When she opened it, a soft melody filled the room. Juniper hugged him so tightly that Rowan could barely breathe. Seraphina watched from her doorway as father and daughter danced around their tiny living room. She realized she had received something too. For years, she had thought Christmas was about remembering what she had lost. Rowan and Juniper had shown her that it could also be about choosing what to build next. Months passed, and Rowan's life changed slowly rather than magically. He kept his new job, paid his debts, and began saving money. Juniper joined an art class. Seraphina became part of their lives in ways none of them had expected. She helped Juniper with drawings, Rowan helped Seraphina repair things around her house, and their friendship grew into something deeper through countless ordinary afternoons. One spring morning, Rowan stood outside the apartment building watching Juniper ride her bicycle for the first time. Seraphina stood beside him, smiling. Rowan remembered the Christmas morning when his only wish had been one peaceful day. He realized he had received something much greater. Not a perfect life, but a life filled with people who cared. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that kindness still matters, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before the story ends, here is a special request. Comment, kindness always finds a way, if you believe one small act of compassion can change an entire life. That Christmas had begun with a father who had almost nothing and a little girl who only wanted to see him smile. But sometimes the greatest gifts don't arrive wrapped beneath a tree. Sometimes they arrive as a neighbor knocking on a door, a stranger offering an opportunity, or a simple reminder that even when life feels unbearably dark, someone may still be willing to stand beside you. Rowan never forgot the question Juniper asked that morning, and years later, whenever someone asked him what his greatest Christmas wish had been, he smiled and gave the same answer. He had wished for one peaceful morning with his daughter, and life had answered by giving him a future.